ตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening to you all. Next week we reach the anniversary of Lumpur Chah's death. It's about 31 years since he died. And amazingly, people still gather at his monastery to remember that anniversary. Practicing the Dhamma, they have a meditation retreat. People come and camp in the monastery in northeast Thailand where he lived. Both Sangha, monks, nuns, and then laity, and usually many thousands of people. Many of the older generation have passed away, the people who actually lived with him, knew him personally. And yet people still find his life and practice inspiring. We have all the teachings, the stories, and there seems to be part of Ajahn Chah, or we say Lumpur Chah, living on to this day through those teachings, but also through the practice, say the way he trained monks, nuns and laity. And there's a certain way based on what the Buddha taught, the Buddha's teaching of the Dhamma and the Vinaya and the training and the discipline, but in a very kind of down-to-earth, practical, doable way that's still applicable in this day and age, what you might call the modern world, although the world is just the world, isn't it? It's neither old nor modern. Every day is just another day, but we say the modern world because it's so far since the time of the Buddha, 2,500 years ago. And one of the reasons people remember Ajahn Chah is because he seemed to bring the Buddhist teachings alive in this era. And the Buddha, we believe, was perhaps the wisest person that ever lived. Full of wisdom, compassion, based on his own experience of awakening, the awakening of the human mind. And then, fortunately, we still have his teachings in the Tripitaka, the three baskets, the suttas, the Vinaya, discipline, and then the Abhidhamma, the higher teachings. But sometimes there seems to be like a gap. People find there's a gap between the Buddha, or the historical Buddha, and his teachings, which are in the texts, and then the reality of living in the world in this day and age. And someone like Lumpur Chah, who was very much appreciated because he seemed to bridge that gap and make the teachings seem relevant and alive and useful to us as human beings. Not just words on a page, but actual words that can be transferred or translated into daily life, daily practice. He was very good at it, so people remember him with gratitude, love, and they can still use his teachings today. Many of his reflections are still very relevant and still helpful for us when we practice meditation, or we look at how we're going to run our lives, lead our lives, you can bring his teachings into your daily life very easily. So he's still remembered, even though it's decades now since he passed away. And particularly in the later part of his life, people loved to go and see Ajahn Chah to get some guidance or solace for their troubles, or just inspiration and ideas how to practice. So he was very used to hearing about people's problems, what we call dukkha. This word in Buddhism which is translated as suffering or stress or pain or problems. Nobody likes dukkha. Nobody wants dukkha. So often people go and complain to Ajahn Chah and say, oh, my life is full of dukkha, full of pain, problems, suffering. What to do about it? Or sometimes a very common reaction to dukkha is this sense that somehow it shouldn't be like this. I don't deserve it. Why do I have so much dukkha in my life? It shouldn't be, it's not right, it's not fair. So they'd say to Ajahn Chah, why is my life so full of dukkha? And one of his answers that he would give quite often was, because you were born. Because you were born, therefore you suffer. Because of birth, there is dukkha. Which stumps a lot of people, because most people never consider that, do they? They never take a second thought about birth being the cause of dukkha. One reason, because we can't remember our birth. Almost nobody in this world can remember the day they were born. Mums can remember giving birth, but even then it may be, as time goes on, it fades. But us as individuals, we don't remember birth. We certainly don't remember all the struggle and suffering of being in the mother's womb, and then the pain of coming out into the world. But literally, why do we suffer in life? Well, it's because we were born, because we're here. And one of the attributes of Nibbana, the goal of Buddhist practice, what the Buddha awakened to, is the fact that Nibbana is a state of, we call it the unborn, the undying or the deathless, and then the unborn. That's why it's so good. That's why people want Nibbana. That's why they want Nibbana, is because it's the end of dukkha, and that includes the end of birth. No more birth, no more death. Because wherever there's a birth, following on from that, there must be aging, sickness, pain, death, and all the kind of problems in between birth and death. Physical dukkha, physical pain and discomfort. Mental dukkha, despair, suffering, including that reaction to dukkha. It's kind of self-perpetuating until we gain some clarity in our mind. You experience dukkha and then you say, why? Why this dukkha? Why do I have to have this problem? And you make another problem. You make more dukkha out of your original dukkha. So in short, this is what the Buddha was teaching, dukkha and the end of dukkha, problems and the end of problems, suffering and the end of suffering. But he expanded on that, obviously, in all his teachings. And then Ajahn Chah was very good at making it seem real, referring to daily life. And starting with birth, then you get craving and attachment. And craving and attachment leads to more birth, and birth leads to more craving and attachment. So this endless kind of cycle. But being born into the world, we got almost, our starting point is we have this sort of feeling, I deserve better. We don't like anything painful or any kind of discomfort, any kind of obstacles or inconveniences. We always have this feeling that it just shouldn't be like this. It should be something better. And so much of human activity is based around trying to escape from dukkha, make things better. And that's not all bad, is it? I mean, we spend a lot of time improving the world so that we have less dukkha. But deep down in our minds, we have this feeling that it shouldn't be like this, I shouldn't have to go through all this dukkha. That's one reason we come to the Buddhist teachings. We're looking for a way out of pain, discomfort, inconvenience, despair, disappointment. Buddhism can maybe offer a way out of that. But the only way out is by investigating, looking more closely, well, where does it come from? And what is the nature of this existence? Because the reason we feel we don't deserve dukkha is because we don't understand the nature of the world and life. Sentient life, being born, inevitably you've got to experience some dukkha. Because you get old, you get sick and you die. And along the way, if you have family, friends, people you identify with strongly as family or friends close to you, that's more dukkha, isn't it? Because they also have to experience birth, aging, sickness and death. So if you love anyone, you're going to suffer because they get old, sick and die. You get old, sick and die. One of you will die first. So one of you is going to suffer. When the other one dies, the one that's left will suffer. And then you have further suffering when you face your own aging, sickness and death. But we try to put that aside. That's why we do this chant just now, recollecting birth, aging, sickness and death. It's just normal, because we love to forget it. And when it happens to us, we say, I don't deserve this, I deserve better. There's that story from the time of the Buddha, Queen Malika, who's married to King Pasenadi of Kosala. She's very wise and had great faith in the Buddha. And he once asked her, who do you love most in the world? Because he had raised her up from poverty, given her the role of being queen, where she had lots of wealth, power, pleasure, happiness. So he expected her to, out of gratitude, to say, well, I love the king most of all. Probably one of the weaknesses of kings is that they expect everyone to love them and see them as tops, the best. But she was also a meditator, very wise, mindful person, so she didn't answer in that kind of false way, flattering the king, oh, I love you. She said, I love myself most. Because that's nature, isn't it? We love ourselves most of all. We are attached to this body, this mind, or we say to our 5 khandhas most of all. And the king was both stumped, how can she answer like that? But also a little bit curious, how can she answer like that? And is that answer true? So off they go to the Buddha to get an answer. Is this true? My queen has said that she loves herself most of all in the world. Is that the correct answer? And the Buddha said, yeah, that's the correct answer. It's the basic default view of the world each individual in this world, whoever they are, will have, is that they love themselves, number one. You're born, and from day one when you're born, you seek pleasure, you fear and try to get away from pain. You're doing that all the time. Before you hardly know anything or anybody in this world, you're already reacting to pleasure and pain from this place of self. You love yourself most. If you, as they say, you put your hand in fire. If a few different people put their hand in fire, you pull your hand out, your own hand out first. It's just instinctive reaction. Pull your hand away from the fire. If someone else had their hand in, well, maybe the next thing you do is pull their hand out. It's just automatic, isn't it? You shrink away from pain as a human being because we love ourselves. We're attached to ourselves. And so we have to suffer as human beings because we have a sense of self, we identify with this body, our feelings and thoughts and this mind as self. And it's constantly aging and changing. So this sense of self is constantly being kind of battered by the truth. And when we're deluded, that delusion is strong. We say, well, I don't deserve aging. I shouldn't get old, I should stay young. Or I don't deserve sickness, but it happens. There's nobody really to blame in all this. But if you were to blame someone, would you blame yourself? Because you were born, therefore you have to get old, get sick, and one day die. And if you attach to anyone else along the way there, they will also get old, sick and die, so they'll bring you further suffering. So it just comes back to the question how to avoid this whole problem of birth, aging, sickness and death. So that leads on to seeking out something that isn't subject to birth and death, and that's Nibbana. But how you get from this starting point of being a human being, still with delusion, still with this feeling, I don't deserve suffering, to the point where you've gone beyond suffering, you've transcended suffering, well that's our challenge. That's what the Buddha is encouraging us to look into with the practice. That's what Ajahn Chah was saying to us. That's what the message from Ajahn Chah basically is, that you can practice and transcend suffering. You can see through the sense of self. You can attain the deathless. But you have to practice. And even the practice may bring some discomfort and dukkha along the way, but it's dukkha for the ending of dukkha. So for those who do remember Ajahn Chah, less and less people can remember him when he was alive. They have this feeling that he embodied Nibbana, the awakened state. He was an awakened being, and that's something that was tangible. So it would be in his words, his responses to different situations and daily life, but also there was a certain feeling or energy or something that you can't put into words also that surrounded Ajahn Chah. A very good energy. Still seems to be something of that there in the monastery at Wat Pah Pong in this day and age, a long time after Ajahn Chah has gone, but you go there, still a very cool, peaceful forest. And when people go there on this retreat time, in next week they have the retreat, people go, they meditate, they chant, they listen to teachings. There seems to be some kind of invisible Ajahn Chah-ness about the place, although it's hard to put your finger on it, but there seems to be something there. And that's the residue, what's left over from when he was alive. But when he was alive, there was this bright, peaceful energy about him. And that would sometimes come out in the way he taught, and very direct teachings he might give to people, individuals, to sort of help them see their dukkha, see where they're going wrong, their craving, their attachment. Or sometimes he'd just give general teachings and people pick what they can from the Dhamma tree that he was. He was a Dhamma tree, and there were leaves and branches and fruits on the tree. And some people were able to pick the fruits and partake of the Dhamma from Ajahn Chah. Some people probably missed it some of the time or all of the time. Just as in the time of the Buddha would give wonderful Dhamma talks which we still have recorded in the suttas. But it's not that everyone would get enlightened listening to the Buddha. Some people no doubt felt very peaceful, calm, maybe even entered states of samadhi listening to the Buddha, but they still might not actually experience the end of suffering or nibbana yet. And the same with Ajahn Chah. People would listen to Ajahn Chah's teachings, and sometimes they get something that really helped them change their view, let go of a bit of their attachment to, and therefore free them from some suffering. But sometimes they wouldn't. Just as we have to struggle with the ordinary realities of sleepiness, dullness, or getting caught up into our negative emotions, mental agitation, worries, fears, insecurities, or the mind that says, I don't deserve this suffering. Whatever it is we get caught up into, just as in the time of Ajahn Chah, in this day and age, you can listen to the Dhamma, but you're still just caught up in your own mental states at that day, on that day, at that time. And that would be the case. Many people would have that experience with Ajahn Chah. They go to Ajahn Chah expecting, hoping for peace, clarity, wisdom. And they may get that, but they also are often fuzzy and caught up in their own moods and their own problems to the point where they might miss what Ajahn Chah was saying, not get it, or perhaps they were sitting there falling asleep, I don't know. So there's many causes and conditions. So having a good teacher, the Buddha or Ajahn Chah or other teachers, is one cause, one factor. There's also each person where their mind is at. And that's why we have to keep practicing regularly, to keep bringing up the causes and conditions in our practice so that our mind is ripe to see the Dhamma or hear it, and maybe whether it's our own reflection on some truth or hearing a talk from a teacher like Ajahn Chah. You have to keep at it, keep the practice going, and maybe one day the causes and conditions will be just right, and then the teaching will go in and something will be released. Some bit of delusion will be released. And what is delusion? Buddha pointed out we see things as permanent that are actually impermanent. And part of our problem is we see this body as permanent, and so when something goes wrong we say, oh, why has this happened? I don't deserve this. We forget that the body is impermanent. It changes, it ages, and it's subject to disease and injury, feels hungry, cold. And our thoughts and our moods are the same. We experience pleasure, sometimes we experience some very peaceful states in our meditation, but then they change. They fade away and we say, oh, where's that nice peaceful state gone? I want to get back to that. I don't deserve being back with my own mind full of worries and problems. I want to get back to that peaceful state I had when I was meditating 6 months ago or something. We have the delusion of seeing things or believing things to be permanent when they're not. And we attach based on that delusion. We want pleasure and happiness to go on forever and ever, but it doesn't. We have the delusion of seeing things as sukha, happiness, when they're actually dukkha. Why are things dukkha? Why is even pleasurable, something pleasurable, why is that still suffering? Because the pleasure doesn't last, it comes to an end. That's its nature, it arises and ceases. Just as the body is subject to birth and death, the mind, mental states, feelings, emotions, positive emotions, pleasurable emotions, they arise, they cease, they don't last. So they're dukkha. That's why we spend a lot of time in meditation observing the arising and passing away of thoughts and feelings and memories and pleasure, because we're bringing our mind to see through the delusion that all these things we attach to should be bringing us happiness when they can't. Or they should be bringing us lasting, permanent happiness when they can't. Nibbana is the only lasting happiness the Buddha talked about, and that's not of this world. It's not something that you can find in the world, and yet we keep looking in the wrong place for Nibbana. Yeah. As one teacher once told me, that you're scratching in the wrong place. Nibbana is not in the body, because the body is impermanent and suffering. Nibbana is not in states of mind, pleasant, blissful states of mind. They're enjoyable and they're good. It's not that they're wrong in the sense. They can be very helpful as part of our practice for letting go of coarser kinds of pain and suffering. That's why we meditate. One reason is to give us a bit of a relief from some of the coarser, more normal kinds of suffering we experience. But they're not an end in themselves, because they also come to an end. They're still suffering. They can't bring us lasting happiness. The last delusion is the delusion of self. We keep thinking, I am this body is me, I am my thoughts, my feelings, my memories, they belong to me, this is who I am, me, mine, myself. It's another delusion. It keeps catching us out, and that's where we have this sense of, I don't deserve this, I deserve something better. Well, in a way you do. You've come in contact with the Buddha's teachings, you deserve Nibbana. You deserve the end of suffering, the deathless. But really you have to create the causes for that. So the only person who really deserves Nibbana is one who has practiced the path, cultivated the path, transcended the attachment to the body, even to the bliss of meditation, and to the pleasures of the world. That person deserves the highest happiness of Nibbana. But normally speaking, we don't yet deserve that because we haven't practiced. So when you have the thought, oh, I deserve better than this, be careful, because that's just feeding the delusion of self. What we really have to do is sit down and say, hold on, I'm attaching to my painful experience or my disappointment or my worry. I'm attaching to it too strongly, giving too much importance in my mind. What I have to do is see it as impermanent and suffering and let it go. Detach, de-identify with it. Then the mind can return to a place of knowing without attaching. That's why we spend so much time focusing on the arising and then the cessation of experience. As you meditate, you're observing feelings arise, but then you're observing them pass away. When things pass away, your mind goes to that place of spaciousness. We often use the word emptiness, meaning empty of self, empty of attachment. That's one thing you can notice every day. Every thought you have about your work, your health, your family, your money, your life, your future, all the things we think about, every thought arises and then ceases. And that's something to investigate. Keep looking at it and ask yourself, is there any thought that doesn't arise and cease? As far as I can see, every thought arises and ceases. And what we call mental formation, sankhara. That's really the flavour of this world. Everything is arising and ceasing. Physical formations arise and cease. Even big things like mountains arise and cease. You get volcanoes and landslides and the changing nature of the physical world. And then the mental world is also arising and ceasing. Beautiful thoughts, wonderful, amazing thoughts, pleasant feelings, blissful thoughts, heavenly thoughts, deep states of samadhi, they have one thing in common, they all arise and cease. Every time we notice that, the mind returns to a place of emptiness where it's knowing but not creating a self out of experience. So this is what the Buddha, the teachers, they all encourage us to do. Keep looking, investigating this sense of self that attaches to the body, to the mind, to the feelings. Question it. Is it really mine? Is it really lasting? Is it really happiness? Is it really self? Or is it the opposite? Because our basic starting point is we attach to this self, like the Queen Malika, we have this delusion. We say this self is what I love, what I attach to, but actually there is no self. It's a delusion. But it's just the way we normally react to things. We always start from this place. There is a me that I love, that I want, that I cherish, look after. The Buddha said, really look into that more deeply. One of the ways they describe the Buddha is he doesn't long for anything. And when you have a sense of self, you identify with body and mind as self, then you're always longing for things, more pleasant experiences, memories, the good old days. Like New Year's time, we always say, oh, I wish things were like the old days. The Buddha didn't long for any of that. The Buddha didn't long for things he hasn't got, doesn't have. He wasn't longing for beautiful, pleasant experiences in the future. He was content in the present moment. Whatever's arising and ceasing in the present moment, he's just aware of that, knowing that. So he doesn't long for anything, doesn't crave or long for things. When the Buddha talked about this teaching, when he said, yeah, it's correct, we love ourselves the most. That's the normal reaction of human beings. We love ourselves more than anyone else. He said, if you see that, if you understand that you love yourself most, then that's your beginning point for practicing the Dhamma, the path that the Buddha taught. Because if you really love yourself, you don't want to harm yourself. If you recognize that you truly love yourself, then you don't want to harm this self. So then you don't want to harm others, because you realize if you harm others, you're harming yourself. Karma. Even harboring a thought against someone else, a negative thought, say anger or jealousy, or even the subtlest conceit, where you're looking down on someone else, you're harming your own mind at that point if you attach to those thoughts. And if you leave them unaddressed, well, they tend to come out into our actions. So if you're harboring negative thoughts to others, well, then you tend to go and act on them as well. So we're always competing with others and rivaling others and doing things to get other people out of our way so we can get this self that we love so much further ahead out of delusion. But if you look closely, you'll see it's in our own interest not to harm others. Because every time you have a negative thought towards others, you're hurting your own mind. Your own mind is blemished or diminished by that thought. So if you truly love yourself, which we do, and you recognize that, then you won't want to harm others, because you know harming others comes back to you, and you're harming yourself. So one of the things people do remember about Ajahn Chah is that, this great sense of selflessness or emptiness in the way he acted, the way he spoke, or just the way he was, his presence, sense of there's nobody home, nobody there. So no anger, no greed. I mean, you can't be sure because you don't really know or see somebody else's mind, but the sense of people had who lived with him was that there's no attachment, so then there's no selfishness, no anger, no fear, no worry. And so if all those qualities are gone, a great sense of peace, purity, peace, what you might call bliss, happiness. So a very selfless person. That's probably why we remember him so well, and we still practice what he taught. And he links us right back to the Buddha. As if a human being, even in this day and age, sees the Dhamma, as the Buddha said. One who sees the Dhamma, or is the Dhamma, or practices the Dhamma and becomes the Dhamma, they see the Buddha. The Buddha and the Dhamma are synonymous. Same. So if Ajahn Chah saw the Dhamma, that's why he represents the Buddha. So maybe I'll leave you with those reflections tonight.